I borrowed her car on a Saturday morning because my truck was blocked in the driveway by the lumber delivery that had come 2 hours early, and I needed to get to the paint supply house on Branch Avenue before noon. Lily said, "Take it. Keys are on the hook," and she went back to her coffee and her laptop, and I grabbed the keys, and I got in, and I hit the navigation button to enter the address. The recent destinations list was open on the screen. I want to be specific about this because the specificity is what I keep coming back to. I did not go into her car intending to look at anything. I did not open the navigation history with any particular suspicion or intention. I hit the button, the screen came up, and the list was just there. The way a browser history is just there when someone else's computer is open and you go to type something in the address bar and the suggestions appear before you finish typing. There were 8 addresses in the recent destinations. 6 of them I recognized: the grocery store, our house, her parents' place in Cranston, her office on Eddy Street, the hair salon on Thayer. Ordinary geography. The map of a life I was part of. 2 of them I didn't recognize. Both on the same street. Both in the Fox Point neighborhood, for miles from our apartment. Both visited on Thursdays. I could tell because the timestamps were right there in the history, each entry dated and timed. The navigation system dutifully logging every trip without understanding that some trips were different from others. I sat in her car in our driveway in Providence, Rhode Island, on a Saturday morning, and I looked at 2 addresses I'd never been given a reason to know about, and something that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind for 4 months locked into place with the specific click of a thing that has finally found its fit. I entered the paint supply house address. I drove there. I got what I needed. I drove home. And the whole way I was thinking about Thursday evenings and an address in Fox Point that wasn't a restaurant or a friend's house or anywhere I'd ever been told about. My name is Marcus. I'm 36 years old. I run a commercial painting company in Providence. 5 guys on crew. We do commercial and industrial work mostly, some high-end residential, the kind of jobs that require lifts and spray equipment and a team that knows what they're doing rather than a guy with a roller and some drop cloths. I started the business at 28 with money I'd saved over 7 years working for other people's painting companies, and I've built it into something that keeps 5 families paid and that I'm proud of in the specific way you're proud of things that came from work rather than luck. Her name is Lily. She's 33, works as an operations director at a mid-size hospital system. Not the clinical side, the administrative backbone of how a healthcare facility actually runs. Staffing, facilities, vendor contracts, the infrastructure that keeps the building operational while the medical work happens inside it. She's been doing this for 8 years, and she's good at it in the way that people who are good at managing complex systems are good at it. Quietly, effectively, without a lot of visible drama. The problems resolve before they become crises. I've always admired that about her. I'm also aware now of the particular ways that skill operates when it's applied to something you don't want seen. We met in 2021 at a fundraiser for a local arts organization. Providence has a strong arts community, a function of RISD being here and of the general creative density of a small city that punches above its weight culturally. And Lily's Hospital had been a sponsor of this particular event, and she was there representing the organization, and I was there because a friend had dragged me along and I'd gone because I hadn't had anything else to do on a Thursday evening in October, and I was trying, in that period of my life, to say yes to more things. I sat down at her table by accident. There was an empty seat, and I took it. And we talked for 3 hours, and I forgot to find my friend until he texted asking where I was. We dated for 14 months. She moved into my apartment on Transit Street in the College Hill neighborhood in January of 2023, and 6 months after that I proposed on the roof of a restaurant in Federal Hill where we'd had our second date, the kind of deliberate callback that felt right because Lily notices details and the detail mattered to her, and I wanted it to matter. She said yes immediately, the specific immediacy of someone who had been hoping for the question, and her hand was shaking slightly when I put the ring on it. And that memory is something I've been going back to in the past 3 weeks and trying to understand in light of everything I now know. We'd been engaged for 14 months when I borrowed her car. Our apartment on Transit Street has the specific quality of a home that 2 people have built together. Her furniture mixed with mine, the accumulated small decisions of shared life, the kitchen configured around both our habits, the rooftop deck she'd wanted and that we'd furnished over 2 summers, the specific way the afternoon light came through the front windows in the spring and early summer. It had become mine in the way that places become yours when you stop noticing them because you live inside them. And I'm noticing it now in a way I wasn't before, because noticing is what you do when you're not sure how much longer you'll be in a place. My flaw, and Lily had mentioned this with the patient honesty of someone who has made peace with a thing while still wishing it were different, is that I give too much ground when something is ambiguous. I see a thing that could go two ways and I default to the more comfortable interpretation. Not because I'm naive, but because I am, at some level, a person who prefers peace over confrontation and who has told himself this is flexibility when it is actually avoidance. Lily had called it charitable, which is the generous version. The less generous version is that I don't push on things that might push back, and the consequence of that is that things that needed to be pushed on were left standing for longer than they should have been. This is relevant to everything that follows. The first thing I noticed was in January. We were 3 months into the engagement, and the general tone of things was what you'd expect from two people who have recently made a decision that felt right and that they were both happy about. Warm, future-oriented, the specific contentment of having settled a thing and being able to relax into it. We were talking about venues and dates in the loose way of people who aren't in a rush but are orienting towards something. Lily had mentioned a name at dinner one evening. Neil, someone she'd gone to college with, who was apparently back in Providence. She'd done her undergrad at Brown before going to get her MHA in Boston, and Neil had been someone she'd known in that period, a friend-of-friends situation that had stayed loosely connected through social media over the years. He'd been living in Boston for a long time. He was an architect, she said, had been working at a firm there for almost a decade, and had recently moved back to Providence for a new position with a local firm. She'd run into him at an event her hospital had co-sponsored. They'd caught up briefly. It was nice to see a familiar face. I said that's nice, small world, and we moved on. In February, she mentioned him again. He'd apparently reached out to get coffee and catch up properly, which they'd done, and she said it was good. He was doing well. The move back to Providence seemed to suit him. His marriage had ended about a year ago, she mentioned, a difficult thing. He was rebuilding. She said it with the specific tone of someone describing a situation that had its own weight. I registered the tone and then let it go because letting things go is what I do, and because everything was plausible, and because the man had just moved back to town and run into an old acquaintance and gotten coffee, and that's a thing that happens. In March, the Thursday evening started. Lily had always been someone who socialized deliberately, but not constantly. A dinner here, a work event there, a regular Sunday morning thing with two close friends that had been established long before me, and that continued as a fixed feature of her calendar. She was not someone who went out frequently on weekdays, which was fine with me because I was often tired by Thursday and preferred the evenings where we were both home. In March, she started going out on Thursday evenings. Not every Thursday, but regularly enough that it became a pattern I registered. She said she and some colleagues from the hospital were doing a recurring dinner, a way to maintain relationships across departments. The kind of thing that healthcare administration apparently generates because people who work in intense environments need to decompress in structured ways with other people who understand the environment. I said that made sense. It did make sense. I had no reason to question it. What I noticed, and I'm going to be honest about this, because honesty is the thing I'm trying to practice now, was that she came home from these Thursday evenings with a quality I didn't have a word for. It wasn't anything dramatic. She was pleasant. She was present. She'd tell me something about the dinner or the conversation. She'd come to bed at a reasonable hour. But underneath all of that was a particular texture, a kind of aliveness, that was subtly different from the version of her who came home from other evenings out. I noticed it the way you notice a shift in air pressure before weather changes. Not something you can point to directly, just a change in the quality of the surrounding atmosphere. I noticed it in March, and I chose the comfortable interpretation. I noticed it again in April, and I chose the comfortable interpretation again. I am capable of choosing the comfortable interpretation many times in a row when the alternative requires me to have a conversation I don't know how to start. In April, the phone started doing the thing. I know this is the detail everyone mentions in these posts, and I know it's become almost cliché at this point, but it happened. A slight shift in the relationship between Lily and her phone around me. A new quality of attentiveness to it. A more deliberate management of what was visible and when. Not extreme. Just a calibration shift in someone whose relationship with their phone I knew well after 3 years. I noticed. I chose. I moved on. The thing that broke through the comfortable interpretations, or started to break through, was a conversation with my friend Dom in late April. Dom is a plasterer, works on a lot of the same kinds of properties I work on. We've known each other for 12 years. We were eating lunch on a job site and I was telling him something about the wedding planning and he asked how things were and I said good. And something in the way I said it, some hesitation, some flatness, made him look at me for a moment before he said, "You sure?" I said I was sure. He said okay. We ate our lunches. But the question sat with me for the rest of the afternoon in the way that the right question sits with you when you haven't been willing to ask it yourself. May was when the background noise became something I couldn't keep in the background. The Thursdays were still happening. I'd counted 5 of them in March and April together, and I was now in a stretch where the counting itself was something I was doing, which told me something about where I was even if I wasn't ready to act on it. I was building a case I'd been refusing to build, the same way I'd been refusing to push on things that might push back, and the case was building itself whether I was actively participating or not. I want to describe the spiral of that period without making it sound more dramatic than it was, because it wasn't dramatic on the surface. It was quiet. It was the specific quiet of someone who is running a constant background calculation while the foreground of their life continues normally. I was pricing jobs and managing crew and ordering materials and doing the ordinary operational work of running a small business. And underneath all of it, I was thinking about Thursday evenings and a name that had appeared in February and a quality in Lily's homecomings that I didn't have a word for. The mundane center of it. I was painting a ceiling in a commercial space in the jewelry district on a Wednesday afternoon in early May, the kind of work that requires your arms and your eyes and a lot of patience and leaves your brain largely free. I was on a lift, working in sections, and I was thinking about Lily and about the Thursdays and about whether I was being a paranoid person or a paying attention person and whether those two things were actually different. I was going around and around on it in the way you go around on things when you're not letting yourself arrive at a conclusion. And I thought, I know her well enough to know when something is different. I have been choosing not to name it. That choice is mine, and it is costing me something. I finished the ceiling. I went home. Lily was already there, working at the kitchen table, and she looked up when I came in and she smiled with the particular warmth of someone who is glad to see you, genuinely glad. And I thought, I can't tell. I can't tell which version of this is the real one because both things can be true, and that's exactly the problem. I didn't say anything that evening, or the next. The following Thursday, she went out again and came home at 9:45 and said the dinner had run long. Everyone was in good spirits. How was my evening? I said fine. She poured herself a glass of water and came and sat next to me on the couch, and we watched something I don't remember and went to bed. And the next morning was Saturday, and there was a lumber delivery that blocked my truck, and I went to grab her keys from the hook. I want to describe what it's like to read a navigation history when you're not sure what you're looking for. The screen came up with the recent destinations list because that's what her navigation system defaulted to when it was opened, the last used state. The list sitting there from whenever she'd last used it. I wasn't expecting it. I was going to dismiss it and type in the paint supply house address. But I looked at it first. The way you look at something when it's in front of you, automatically, before your brain has decided whether you want to see it. 6 familiar addresses, 2 unfamiliar ones, both on Wickenden Street in Fox Point, both with Thursday timestamps. I looked at the timestamps. The first one was in March 14th, a Thursday, arrival time logged at 7:08 p.m., departure at 10:23 p.m. 3 hours and 15 minutes at an address on Wickenden Street that I'd never been given a reason to know about. The second was in April 4th, a Thursday, 6:54 p.m. to 10:47 p.m. 3 hours and 53 minutes. I memorized both addresses before I entered the paint supply house location and pulled out of the driveway. At the supply house, I bought what I needed, and while I was waiting for the order to be pulled, I Googled the Wickenden Street address on my phone. It came up as a residential building, a converted Victorian, split into apartments, no business listing, no public profile of any kind attached to it. Just an address in Fox Point. I Googled the second address. Same result. Residential. Fox Point. And then I searched the street and the neighborhood because I was standing in a paint supply house with a cold feeling in my chest, and I needed to do something with my hands other than just standing there. And I found that Fox Point was a neighborhood I knew the shape of. Older residential, close to the water, the kind of area where young professionals and academics lived in converted Victorians because the rents were lower than College Hill and the neighborhood had its own character. The kind of neighborhood where an architect who had recently moved back to Providence from Boston might find an apartment. I drove home. I put her keys back on the hook. I said the trip had gone fine. I went to my workshop in the back and I stood there for a while. The following Thursday, I didn't go anywhere. I told Lily I had paperwork to catch up on and I stayed home. And at 6:20 she said she was heading out for dinner. And I said have fun, and I watched her car pull out of the driveway. I picked up my phone and I opened the navigation app on my own phone and I entered the first Wickenden Street address. I drove to Fox Point. Her car was parked on the street outside the building. I drove past without slowing. I parked 2 blocks over and I sat in my truck for a long time. Then I drove home. I was back before she was. I was sitting in the kitchen when she came in at 10:15 and she said, "How did the paperwork go?" And I said, "Fine." Almost caught up and we went to bed. I lay awake for most of that night. I was not going to do this by myself for another week. The next morning was a Saturday. I made coffee. Lily got up and came to the kitchen in the specific morning way I knew, the slightly squinting, pre-contacts version of her that I'd been seeing for 3 years, the one that went straight for coffee before anything else. She poured her cup and she sat across from me, and she looked at me, and something in my face, or in the absence of my usual face, made her stop. She looked at me with the specific stillness of someone who is doing a calculation. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Okay." Very carefully. "Who lives at the address on Wickenden Street?" In Fox Point. The stillness became something else. Something that moved through her face in a controlled way, the management of a response. She was quiet for a moment. "How do you know that address?" she said. "Your navigation history. Last Saturday when I borrowed the car." She looked at her coffee cup. "I drove past last night," I said. "Your car was outside." She set the cup down. She looked at her hands. "Is it Neil?" I said. She didn't answer immediately. The not answering was its own answer, and I think we both knew it. "Lily." "Yes." Said to the table. Just that. One word. I sat with it for a moment. "How long?" She closed her eyes. "Since February." February. A month after she'd mentioned running into him. A month after the coffee to catch up properly. February through May. 3 months of Thursday evenings and navigation history and a quality in her homecomings I hadn't had a word for. "The Thursday dinners," I said. "The colleagues from the hospital. Some of them were real." She looked up at me then. "I need you to know that. Some of them were actually. But some weren't." "No." She shook her head. "Some weren't." "Which ones were real?" She named 3 evenings. I ran the calendar in my head. The ones she named were the minority. "Does he know we're engaged?" I said. "Yes." And he was fine with that. Something moved through her face. No. He wasn't fine with it. He kept saying that I needed to be honest with you. He said he didn't want to be in a situation where, she stopped. "He pushed me to tell you. More than once. But you didn't tell me." "No." She pressed her hands flat on the table. "I kept thinking I was going to end it, and then I could just not tell you, and it would be over, and you'd never." She stopped. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you were going to let me marry you without knowing." She looked at the table for a long time. "Yes," she said. "I think that's what I was doing. I don't know if I could have actually gone through with it. I'd like to think I couldn't have. But you don't know." "I don't know." I looked at the kitchen. The kitchen we'd arranged around both our habits. Her coffee mug on the table. The ring on her hand that I'd put there on a rooftop on Federal Hill 14 months ago. "Are you in love with him?" I said. The silence lasted long enough that I knew the answer before she gave it. "I don't know," she said. "I think I might be. I think what I feel." She shook her head. "There's something there that I don't have a clean way to describe to you." "Try." She was quiet for a long time. "He's someone I knew when I was becoming who I am," she said carefully. "Someone who knew that version of me. And being around him has felt like," she stopped, "like being seen by someone who knew the original and not just the current version. I don't know if that's love or something that feels like love and isn't." I sat with that. The original version. The one before hospital administration in Providence and a 2-year engagement to a commercial painter who doesn't push on things that might push back. "I need you to take the ring off," I said. She looked at her hand. Her eyes were wet. I'm not saying that's the final answer. I'm saying I need you to take it off today, and I need to be in this apartment alone." She slid the ring off slowly. She set it on the table between us. She looked at it for a moment, and then she looked at me. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I know that's. Please call someone and go be there." She called her friend from work, a woman named Adiz who I'd met a handful of times and who had always seemed like a good person. She packed what she needed, and at the front door she stopped, and she turned around, and she said, "The engagement. The last 3 years. That was real, Marcus. I need you to know that." I looked at her. I thought about the rooftop and the shaking hand and the immediate yes, and about navigation timestamps and 3 months of Thursday evenings and an address in Fox Point. "I'll call you," I said. She left. I picked up the ring from the table, and I held it for a long time. Then I put it in the dish by the door where we kept things we didn't want to lose, and I went and sat on the roof deck in the Saturday morning light, and I thought about everything and nothing for a long time. I'm writing this 4 days later. The ring is still in the dish. I said I'd update. Here it is. The response to the original post was larger than I expected for something I wrote, mostly because I needed somewhere to put it. I read through the comments over several nights, and some of them helped in the way that strangers who've been through similar things can help. Not by solving anything, but by making the situation feel less like a room only you're trapped in. One comment said, "The detail about the ring still being in the dish is the whole story in one image." I've been thinking about that observation because it's accurate, and because the ring is still there, 3 weeks later, and I've been stepping around the dish every morning without quite being ready to decide what to do about it. Here's what happened. Lily has been at Adi's apartment in the Mount Hope neighborhood for 18 days. We had our first real conversation 3 days after she left. Not logistics, an actual conversation, the kind where things get said that needed saying. She told me about Neil in more detail, that he'd moved back from Boston after his divorce, and that she'd run into him at an event in January, and something had happened in that encounter that she hadn't known how to process. She said she'd tried to tell herself it was just the nostalgia of seeing someone from a significant period of her life, and that it would pass if she gave it space. And instead of passing, it had become something she'd made decisions around, and the decisions had compounded. And by the time she understood the scope of what she was doing, she was already 3 months in and didn't know how to come back. She said Neil had been the one who'd consistently pushed her toward honesty. She said he'd told her in March that he wasn't willing to be the thing she was hiding indefinitely, that he had his own principles about that, and that if she wasn't prepared to be honest with me, then they needed to stop. She'd said she was going to tell me. She'd bought time with that answer through March and April. By May, she understood she'd been lying to him about it too, and that she was lying to everyone in different directions simultaneously, and that the navigation history coming up on the screen when I borrowed her car had been, and she said this clearly, with a specificity I found striking, something she'd felt as relief as much as terror. She'd wanted to be found. She hadn't known how to get there herself. I've been sitting with that for 3 weeks. The specific grief of it. Not just that it happened, but that part of her had been trying to end it and couldn't, and that the ending had to come from outside rather than from her. And what that means about the things she's capable of when she's in a situation she doesn't know how to leave. The apartment on Transit Street is mine. The lease has always been in my name. Lily moved in 2 years ago. We talked about adding her to the lease and hadn't gotten there yet, which is one of the small practical details that cuts a different way now than it did before. She has her things here still, most of them, the logistics of a full move not yet undertaken. I've been in the apartment with the presence of her things and the absence of her, which has its own particular texture. I told Dom. I called him the Monday after the Saturday conversation, and I gave him the outline, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What do you need me to do?" I said I didn't know yet. He said, "I'll come by Thursday." He came by Thursday, and we sat on the roof deck and drank beer, and he didn't offer opinions I hadn't asked for, and at the end of the evening he said, "You're going to be okay." I'm not saying that to be nice. I'm saying it because I've known you for 12 years and I know how you're built. I've been holding on to that. My parents found out when my mother called on a Sunday. She calls every Sunday, has for as long as I can remember, the weekly check-in of a woman who raised 4 kids and has not entirely adjusted to the idea that the checking in might be less urgent now that we're all adults. She heard something wrong in my voice and I told her the general shape of it, and she was quiet, and then she said, "Do you want me to come down?" I told her not yet. She said she'd wait for me to tell her when. She's been texting me once a day since, not asking about the situation, just ordinary things, a photo of the garden or something she made for dinner, the low-key steadiness of someone who knows that the thing you need sometimes is just the ordinary world continuing. My father's response, when I told him separately, was characteristically brief. You'll figure out what you want to do. You always do. 4 words of premise and 4 words of conclusion. The complete architecture of how my father approaches most things. I found it oddly sustaining. Lily's family is her business to manage, and I've stayed out of it. Her mother, who lives in Cranston and who I've known for 3 years, and who has always treated me with genuine warmth, sent me a brief text about a week in. 3 sentences. Careful and honest and kind. I thanked her, and we left it there. The complication that nobody predicted, Neil Ferris sent me a message. He'd found me through LinkedIn. I have a business profile there, not very active, but it exists. He sent me a message that was about 5 sentences long and that I've read probably 15 times since. He said he'd known about me from the beginning and had not been comfortable with the situation. He said he'd pushed Lily toward honesty repeatedly and that he wanted me to know that whatever had happened, he had not been a willing participant in the deception, that he'd been trying to get it into the open for months. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to explain himself further than that. He just said what he said and left it there. I haven't responded. I've thought about responding, and I've come to the same place each time, which is that I don't know what I would say that would serve a purpose I can identify right now. He's 39. He's an architect. He moved back to Providence after a hard year and reconnected with someone he'd known in his 20s, and somewhere in that sequence he apparently tried to do the right thing even if the right thing arrived late and came through navigation history rather than through Lily's own agency. I'm holding that as one true thing among several true things and not making it into more than it is. The mutual friend situation has its usual distribution. Our overlapping social world, not enormous. We'd been in the city 3 years and our friend groups had started to merge, but weren't fully merged, has responded with the appropriate mix of silence and presence. 2 couples who were more mine have been explicitly present. The people who were more hers have gone appropriately quiet. Dom, who was never Lily's particular friend, but who has been mine for 12 years, has been the most consistently useful presence in my life for 3 weeks, showing up on Thursday evenings not because Thursdays mean anything now, but just because it's when he has time and he's decided to use the time for this. The inside of it. The first morning I woke up after Lily had taken a bag to Adiz. The first morning the apartment was actually just mine. I lay in bed in the specific silence of a space that had been shared and wasn't. I ran the inventory. What day? What do I have on? And then the weight came back in the sequence it's been coming back in every morning since. Arriving the way it arrives when you've been awake enough times from the same situation that the memory knows when to appear. The ring is still in the dish by the front door. I walk past it on my way out every morning, and I look at it, and I go. I don't know what I'm waiting for before I move it. Maybe I'm waiting to know what I want to do with it. Maybe I'm waiting for the doing to feel like less of a statement. Maybe I just haven't been ready. One of those things is probably more true than the others, and I haven't been willing to figure out which one yet. I found her rain jacket in the closet about a week in, the olive green one she wore on job site visits when she came to see the progress on something we were working on, which she'd done twice, because she liked seeing what the work looked like in stages. It was hanging behind my heavier coats, easy to miss, and I found it when I was reaching for something behind it. I stood there with the jacket in my hand for a moment, and then I put it back behind the heavier coats and closed the closet. There's a coffee shop on Wickenden Street in Fox Point. And yes, I know what that means. I'm aware that Wickenden Street is now a street that means something it didn't before, but the coffee shop has been there for years, and I've been going to it since before any of this happened, and I'm not ready to give it up. I went on a Sunday 2 weeks ago, the first time since everything. I sat at the same table I always sit at. I ordered what I always order. And I thought, the street is the same street. The coffee shop is the same coffee shop. The things that are different are in me and not in the street. I still buy the specific brand of Greek yogurt she likes when I go to the market. I've caught myself doing it twice. Each time I stand in the dairy aisle holding the container for a moment before I decide whether to put it back or keep it in the cart. Both times I've kept it. Both times I've eaten it myself over the following week and thought about how it tastes different when it's not being bought for someone. The roof deck is getting a lot of use. I go up there in the evenings when the weather is right and I sit in the chair that's mine and I look at the skyline. The specific Providence skyline that I've been looking at from this rooftop for 4 years, and I let the evening be what it is. Sometimes I bring a beer. Sometimes I just sit. Dom has been up there with me a few times. We don't always talk. The view is the same view, and the city is the same city, and I find that steadying. Here is where I actually am. Lily and I have talked 7 times since she went to Adiz. For logistics conversations. 2 harder ones. 1, 3 days ago, that was different from all the others. She said, in the hard conversations, things about our 3 years that I've been going through carefully since. About the comfortable interpretations I defaulted to. About the way she'd wanted to be reached for and hadn't known how to ask for the reaching. About the feeling of being known by someone who'd known the original version. Neil, the brown version, the 22-year-old version before hospital administration and adult life, and the accumulation of what she'd become, and what that feeling had made possible that shouldn't have been possible. She didn't say any of this to justify what she'd done. She was clear about that. She said, "I'm telling you because you deserve to understand what happened, not because understanding it means it was okay." It wasn't okay. I heard that. I've been sitting with both the understanding and the not okayness simultaneously and trying not to let one cancel the other. The conversation 3 days ago was different because she asked a direct question for the first time. She asked if I would be willing to talk to someone together, a therapist, a counselor, a structured space. She said she wasn't asking me to decide anything about the engagement or the future. She said she'd been honest with me about everything she could be honest about, and she wanted the rest of the honesty to happen somewhere with support around it. She said she understood if the answer was no. I told her I was thinking about it. That was the honest answer. Here is the also honest answer, the one I've been working toward for 3 weeks. I don't know yet what I want the future to look like, and I've decided that not knowing is where I actually am, and that pretending to know, in either direction, would be the comfortable interpretation, and I'm trying to stop doing that. I've started seeing a therapist. His name is Dr. Jonah Pereira. He has an office on Westminster Street, and he has caught me doing the comfortable interpretation thing in our first 2 sessions, which is impressive given how little time he's had to observe it. He said in our second session, "You've been describing the situation in terms of what Lily did and what Neil did. I'd like to know more about the choices you made, not to assign blame, to understand what you want to do differently." I told him I'd been working on that. He said, "Good. Keep working." The painting business keeps going because painting businesses don't pause for personal situations, and also because I built it from nothing and it matters to me, and the crew has jobs to run, and I owe them the operator they hired on. Dom covered for me on a day and a half in the first 2 weeks without being asked. I covered him on a job once 2 years ago for a different reason, and we've never spoken about the accounting of it, and we're apparently not going to start now. The ring is still in the dish. I'm going to move it soon. Not because I know what moving it means, toward the conversation it starts, or toward the finality of putting it somewhere it won't be the first thing I see every morning, but because I know that leaving it there is the comfortable interpretation of a situation that needs something other than comfort. I borrowed her car to get paint supplies, and the navigation system told me everything it knew. And what I've been learning in the 3 weeks since is that there's a difference between the comfortable reading of a map and the accurate one, and that I've been reading things comfortably for long enough that learning to read them accurately is its own kind of work, and the work starts with me. She left the ring on the table when I asked her to take it off, and I put it in the dish by the door where we keep things we don't want to lose, and every morning I step around it on my way out. And I still don't know what that means, but I know that the not knowing is at least honest, and honest is somewhere I've needed to get to for a while. Tomorrow, a man drives to the airport to pick up his fiancée from a work conference, and the person walking out of arrivals beside her is someone she told him had canceled on the trip 2 weeks ago.